So I started working in the IT department at a startup company. I loved it working at a startup company. Afterwards, I worked to a bank, and then I decided to go back to startups again. Okay, I'm going to talk about software and its updates and what is it that you have to take care about, especially, yeah, why you want to upgrade. Okay, I hope microphone's on. Okay, Swikey. Dijaish Nekalbun. I hope that was at least somehow a proper pronunciation. So that is the reason why we're doing this talk in English. I've never learned Lithuanian. It's the first time I'm being here. I'm very thankful for the invitation and for all the organizations around here. So basically, who am I? My name is Martin. I'm living in Berlin now since 11 years. Usually I was living in Frankfurt Main area. That was the reason why I was working for bank environments over there. Heading over to Berlin 11 years ago when the startup scene there was growing. And during that time, I also got in contact with Puppet in the first place. I was busy with setting up minor platforms, and I wouldn't like to do stuff manually. That's the reason why, yeah, I took a couple of weeks. Over a couple of weeks, I took a view on specific tools that are available, and I found Puppet for me the most easy tool to use, and that is the reason why I'm, well, still using Puppet. Besides that, we are a Puppet training partner, and I'm also the co-author of the Puppet 4 Essentials book. And since maybe many people, or these people who use Puppet for quite some time, so let's say back to 2009 maybe approximately, they might have heard of Example 42, being an open source project delivering modules to people so they can easily use them. People who follow up in the past few months will recognize that we have deprecated most of our modules. Basically, there's a reason behind it, because we decided to discontinue development of the 24th Apache modules or the 36th MySQL module. Instead, we are concentrating on collaborating with other teams on their modules. And we are now working on PSIC, the Puppet System Infrastructure Construction Kit, which is more a sophisticated control repo, or how Alessandro puts it into word, a Puppet control repo generator on steroids. What is it that I'm going to talk about here? Basically, it's upgrading and upgrading to Puppet 4. I'm interested from the audience, who's already using Puppet now? Nobody. Wow, okay, so you're not busy with doing upgrades because you haven't started using Puppet at all. So my advice is just start with Puppet 4, or even wait a couple of more weeks, but more to that afterwards. So basically, it's why is it that you want to upgrade at all? And when people moving from Puppet 3 to Puppet 4, they were complaining about, why is Puppet breaking so many things? They changed things, how Puppet is working, how our code is not compatible with the new version. So what is it that I have to do now to get my code base working again on a Puppet 4 code base? We will dig into how to upgrade best, so what is the approach for upgrading a Puppet-based infrastructure, and some, well, outlook in the near future. In between, we have some Hangman game. Who knows about the Hangman game? A game for little children, guessing words by asking for letters that will be entered. No need for asking for letters, we will just use words, and I can start just with the first letter of all of the words, but we will deal with all of these words during this talk. So the first thing is, why do you want to upgrade at all? Why are you asking this question? Don't you upgrade your systems anyway? So you have them running, so installed back in 1996. Some SUSE 4.2 or something like that, some Slackware distribution running 0.1 kernel. Okay, it's so old you won't get exploits for these old kernel versions. That's absolutely sure. You will get exploits for newer versions only. But with Puppet, it's somehow also the same pattern. You want to upgrade, like you upgrade your MySQL instances, like you upgrade your distributions. You're migrating from CentOS 6 to CentOS 7, for example. The only thing with Puppet what is different, Puppet is not Puppet is not part of the distribution. So Puppet really has its own releases, its own repositories, and basically there's a reason behind it. Puppet releases too fast for distribution to cope with this, so that distributions can't deal with the speed. How long does it take to get a package from Debian SID into stable? Usually up to 2 years, maybe 3 years. With Puppet, it's also the pattern on when did they release which version. And the end of life for Puppet 3 was announced almost 1 year, let's say 9 months ago. 9 months ago they said, okay, well, from December, so it's 1 year ago now. They said Puppet 3.0 will be end of life by end of last year. So it won't receive any security updates, it won't receive any fixes, it won't receive any updates, additional functionality. Besides that, Puppet 4 was already released 2 years ago in March, so it's exactly 2 years ago, which is the normal release cycle for Puppet for a major release version. So when you compare it over the past 3 years, it's 2.5 years from major version to major version. And even the Vox Populi community on GitHub, which is the Puppet community on GitHub, they decided to drop support for Puppet 3 starting end of March this year. So they are now migrating their code base to be fully functional with Puppet 4 only. They're making use of new features. Puppet 4 has still at least a couple of versions that are still supported for the Puppet Enterprise customers, which have the long-term support version in place. And by the way, as I mentioned it, things are moving and 2 years are gone since the last major release. Puppet 5 is announced and scheduled, and they haven't talked otherwise yet, to be released by May, which is next month. So should I wait a couple of weeks and wait for Puppet 5 and just take the 5.0.0 versions? Personally, I'm always afraid when I hear something like a 0.0 version, because I'm absolutely sure there is definitely something not properly working. So when it comes to upgrade, I agree, yes, please run upgrades either regular or permanently, but at least do them. Maybe when you do major upgrades, not use the very first version. Maybe wait a couple of weeks. People will find issues with it. The first people that will find issues with Puppet releases is the internal Puppet operations teams, as they are forced to use the pre-release versions of Puppet, so they identify errors or mistakes in the Puppet code base in the first hand. Normally, Puppet does 4 releases per year. That is the reason why distributions can't deal with that speed of Puppet. And Puppet started with Puppet 4 a new packaging system. So whoever had a look on Puppet 2 or Puppet 3, it was basically a Ruby gem that you need to install. So, okay, what is it that you need to install a Ruby gem? The first place is you need Ruby. You need a supported Ruby version. This now leads to difficulties like Puppet saying newer Ruby versions have speed improvements, newer Ruby versions have security improvements. Think about Red Hat 5 and which Ruby version was included? 1.8.4, a real nice Ruby version which with a built-in feature. It's called a memory leak. So when you have the agent running, don't expect your system to be fully functional for a long time. It depends on how much memory you have given to that system. So you want to be sure that you have secure Ruby versions in a pattern, why secure, that they receive security updates. So the actual, at the moment they're checking for 2.1 version of Ruby, which might be not available on all platforms, on all distributions. Think about enterprise distributions like Oracle or Red Hat Enterprise or SUSE Enterprise Linux. They insist that nobody may install a package into the core system. But how to use the install software on these systems? Usually you say, oh, install everything into opt. And this is what Puppet is now doing since Puppet 4. They bundle everything they need. So they bring Ruby, they bring OpenSSL, they bring Puppet, and they bring all the requirements they need. Which of course means Puppet now must have a look on OpenSSL CVEs, they must look for Ruby security fixes and patch them accordingly. That's the agent side. So the agent side is now a fully enclosed piece of software. If you want to get rid of it, maybe you should first kill the daemon, and then you can just remove all Puppet labs, and all occurrences of Puppet is gone from your system. Installation also as easy. You just install the Puppet agent package, which bundles everything into the proper location. That's the agent side. Puppet configuration management is an agent server model. So you have a daemon running, or you can run it via cron if you don't like a daemon. You have the agent running, connecting to the Puppet server. In the old days, the Puppet server was also a Ruby application. Well, it's a Ruby web application, so it's a Ruby on Rails application they had in place. Mostly this was running on top of Apache or Nginx in combination with Mod Passenger or Unicorn. With a later Puppet 3 release, they decided to switch the server from being a Ruby on Rails application to being a JRuby instance that is now available. So they bring now, within Enterprise, they bring their own Java. Within open source, you just need an OpenJDK 1.8 available, and you have a Clojure application running on JRuby as your master process. So why the hell did they go from this nice, slight, little Ruby application to a huge, bloated Java thing? Well, the first thing, performance. With the elder versions, where they had the Ruby on Rails application, they said, Puppet said, with one server you can manage, okay, they are very careful, 600 nodes. We made setups where we say we have one Ruby on Rails server running on Apache Mod Passenger with some tuning on the passenger side that can deal with 1000 nodes without problems. But scaling beyond that was always difficult. With the JVM now, they say, oh, one JVM Puppet master can handle up to 4000 nodes. So this is a complete other number of nodes you see now. So especially for larger installations. By the way, 4000 nodes. Who's running more than 1000 nodes? Nobody. Okay. So I'm wondering, because even smaller companies, when you see the development department and you offer them some kind of a self-service portal to spin up virtual machines or even containers, it's astonishing how fast the numbers of virtual machines are growing. With one of our customers, they started with 40 machines internally for development purpose. Everybody was working on these 40 machines on the applications, which caused issues. You had to schedule who may do which release upon which time frame. Then they said, okay, let's build something like a service for developers where they can spin up their own development instances. And immediately within, it was 4 weeks approximately, we had 2,500 VMs running. So they are eager to have everything by themselves under their control, so they can say, this piece of software should be running in QA state, this piece of software is our piece of software, should be running in development state, because we are still in development purpose. So expect machine numbers to grow when you offer services for developers, and even for not only developers, also for DBAs, also for the ops people. They also want to identify whether things are working properly, and they are happily making advantage of the self-service portal you have now available. So with upgrade from Puppet 3 to Puppet 4, basically it doesn't mean that you just have only another packaging system, that you have now Ruby enclosed, that the server is running on Java. It's a change, it's a new version, and when you bring out new versions, you mostly also would like to do deprecations. So they were breaking things that are working in Puppet 3. Which brings us to the hangman, and at least to the first term, it's meant culture. What is this culture thing? Why do I mention culture when I say changes and deprecations? Is this a culture to break everything? And it's not the culture to break everything. It's the culture to look what you have done so far. So when Puppet started back in 2005 approximately, 2004 to be honest, they started working on the toolchain. They were trying to enter an area where no one has been before, and they say, oh, see, there's a mountain. Let's walk on top of it. On top of the mountain, what they have thought is the mountain, they said, oh no, it's not a mountain, it's only a hill. The mountain is in front of us, we have to climb further. And then people were looking back behind them and saying, look, this was the way that we took to get up here. And they look astonished like, why haven't we used that way? That would have been far more easier for us to get here. So you're doing things under a certain condition, under precondition that you think that is the best approach to do. And it's an agile method to always repeatedly check whether the condition is still okay or whether something has changed by the way how you have gained experience. So this is also some DevOps-ish thing. This is what we call culture within DevOps, to also allow yourself to stop doing things and breaking with it when you see it's no longer worth continuing maintaining an old platform. Otherwise, you still have the next legacy platform available. So, for example, Puppet did a review on how is Puppet used in the first place. They do that regular. And they identified a couple of problems. And the major ones have been that they learned that inside Puppet you can inherit information from one thing to another. That they said inheritance in Puppet is not the right way to deal with Puppet. So we have to skip it because it's breaking too many things. They had some functions for importing other Puppet code, and they learned this is also the wrong way because we have within Puppet we have modules, we have the auto-loading concept, so things are there automatically. Why do we have to import them? And of course they said we need to clean up the code base to allow for new functionality. So on the next couple of slides I will give some example Puppet code. There's always code that is no longer working with Puppet 3, like in this case. You have Puppet code manifests, and inside the manifest you say, I'm importing another file. And with Puppet and the module structure, you say, no, don't do it this way. You are able to overwrite namespaces, which is the most worst thing you can do. It's hidden, it's not obvious. And the best thing you can do with Puppet is, first is the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And the second thing, always be obvious and don't hide everything. Don't hide anything. So there was no need for doing import to allow loading of classes within Puppet. Another use case for import was having some kind of a base node and saying this base node is now my basis and all other nodes inherits the information from this base node. The node is what we call where Puppet agent is running on. In elder times, people were putting their variables, information, logical code inside, and nowadays people are saying, no, this is not the best idea to do so. The best idea is one node has a use case, a business use case mostly, so it has a purpose, it has a value for the company. Let's use this term to describe the node, so one node has one use case only, so no need for doing inheritance anymore. Oh, node is here. I'm very sorry. This is the node now. So here is the node, and here we see, okay, the node inherited from the base node, and we don't need this anymore. Puppet changed a lot of more other stuffs. For example, when you see Puppet code and developers see some kind of a variable, they say, but this variable never changes. So when it's a constant, I will write it in capital letters. But capital letters in Puppet have a very specific meaning, being a reference. So Puppet decided, no, we will no longer allow variables in capital letters. We will no longer allow classes or variables starting with a digit, especially not with a 0 digit, because that means it's octal number, but P afterwards is definitely not part of the octal numbering scheme. Another thing what people were doing was writing names of classes with a minus sign inside. Well, the minus sign is now strictly a mathematical operator. Within Puppet 3, everything was stringified, so that was not a problem, it was just a dash, so everything's fine, or a hyphen. Now with Puppet 4, we have another solution around saying a minus sign is a mathematical sign, and we need to subtract. What is it that we have to subtract? We have to subtract ng from syslog. Oh, interesting. What is the result? I don't know. So it's forbidden now to use the minus sign in any kind of names. There are some other issues, like an empty variable was in Puppet 3 always returning true when you check it on a Boolean algebra logic, which is per se false. So an empty string is something. It's not false. So it should be evaluated to true. Every every bool logic does this in the same pattern. Puppet did it wrong in the first place, and they corrected it with Puppet 4. With Puppet 3, there was an undocumented feature like having Ruby classes instead of Puppet DSL classes inside. And Puppet decided, no, we will discontinue this allowance of Ruby classes inside Puppet because we don't know how should we test what people are doing. They have the power of full Ruby, but they should use the DSL only instead. So they just skipped the Ruby part completely and they just dropped the old code base. Okay, these are deprecations. And why should one now go for Puppet 4 when there are so many deprecations and I have to rework my code, which is really not nice. I have worked heavily on that code, so for half a year for having the code ready, and now I should, what, throw it away, start from scratch? Well, there's also some features which are built inside Puppet now. The problem was, how do you deal in Puppet 3 with structured data when everything you had was string, array, hash, bool? That's all the data types you had. So it was difficult dealing with complex data. But it was made a decision to introduce a type system. So Puppet now knows about integers, float, boolean, hashes, structs, arrays. So all the standard data types you have in any kind of scripting or programming language. The other thing was, when you work with templates, they were relying on the embedded Ruby template engine, ERB template engine. The ERB template engine requires the server to jump out of the JRuby into the ERB and back into the return the result into the JRuby. It was slowly. So they decided, wait, we want to skip Ruby anyway. So why not use Puppet DSL inside of templates? So that is the reason why they said, okay, we will add EPP as a template engine. Both new features are purely optional. You don't have to use them. So we were not enforced to make use of these new features. So how do these new features look like? What is it with the type system? This is an example, short example code where I say we have a class definition in Puppet and it's a parameterized class, and this parameterized class has two parameters and we expect these data to be a Boolean value. When you don't do this data validation, you have the problem that people might put false into a string which evaluates to true. So it's the wrong behavior, and your colleague will show up next to you and saying, hey, you told me you have parameterized the class and I have passing in the false value and I still get the server installed. What the hell did you do? And then you tell him, oh, you provided a string, you should have provided a bool value. Yeah, but the code should know about that. So now the code knows about that. Due to the type system, we have something else now available. We have the possibility of having private functions within data, so called lambdas. So we can now use Puppet code and we can say we iterate, for example, over a hash map. We do an each loop over the hash map. We receive the keys and the according values, and we can reuse them afterwards in some kind of Puppet code, for example, generating users, and the data are stored someplace completely different. With the EPP template engine, it's similar. You don't write ERB Ruby code anymore inside the template engine. You just write Puppet code, full stop. So it's only Puppet DSL, and you don't have to switch between the Ruby style and the Puppet style when it comes to coding your infrastructure. Okay, so I want to make use of these new features. But how do I upgrade now? What is the process? Where do I start? Generally, how do I test maybe in the first place prior I begin upgrading? You have two different possibilities. The first one is a Puppet internal built-in solution. When you're running on Puppet 3, you can activate the Puppet 4 parser on a certain environment and test whether this is working properly. The other one is use some extensions. So the first thing is internally built in. It's the so-called future parser setting. From a perspective from today, Puppet said it was not good naming this a future parser. This was true from Puppet 3 perspective, but today it's the Puppet 4 parser. But they have chosen the name and they have kept it. And within an environment, you can just specify that you want, for this specific environment, you want to make use of the Puppet 4 parser already. So you can just create an environment on your Puppet master and let your nodes run against this environment and see whether is the code behaving the same. But this is more like trial and error. And trial and error, okay, in development, maybe no. In production, definitely no. So you want to find some other solution to identify, is my code still working? And there are two tools available. One is directly from Puppet. It's the catalog preview tool that generates the catalog twice. One time with the old parser and one time with the new parser, and then it previews, it compares the tooling, the catalogs. Another solution is the Octo Catalog diff. By the name, people might guess it's a tool from GitHub. GitHub also manages their infrastructure with Puppet, and they were also eager to upgrade, and they said, no, the catalog preview tool is not exactly what we are looking for. It's a little bit too complicated in the setup. We want it more easily. So they decided to also release their Octo Catalog diff tool, which just shows you on the command line a diff between two nodes, or when they don't have a diff, then they have nothing to show and say catalogs are equal amongst both nodes. And of course, the best thing you can do is testing and testing. And when you've done testing and testing, maybe you should go on and continue with testing. So doing Puppet integration tests, doing Puppet acceptance tests. Have some kind of CI/CD, whether you call it pipeline, stream, logic, whatever, that says I'm running the test one time with my actual Puppet version, and when that passes, I'm doing a second run with the newer Puppet version. Maybe that's a non-blocking test, but at least I see, is the result still the same? So do my nodes still get configured? Make use of Beaker in combination with Docker to spin up containers where you install shortly Puppet inside and you apply your code inside, and then you can check with server spec whether the server is configured properly. Is there a package? Is there a service running? Is SE/Linux enabled or disabled? So after you have passed all this test and you're confident that your code base is now ready for Puppet 4, then you want to start with the first thing, it's the master. You always upgrade the master first. Usually Puppet says we support one minor version difference between master and agents. Okay, there are versions that you can skip. So you don't have to go from 3.8 to 4.0 to 4.1 to 4.5. No, you can directly go from 3.8 supposed to 4.8 and from then to 4.10, for example. The thing is now, and to reach this goal, to upgrade my Puppet server, I have existing Puppet code. So how do I start? Do I refactor or do I rewrite? So do I just put some effort into existing code base, or do I use big effort in building everything again from scratch? Basically, when customers ask us what is it that they should do, we answer with questions and ask them, does your Puppet code already follow best practice? So we get asked, okay, what is modern best practice? Modern best practice is using the pattern of roles and profiles for node classification and implementation of upstream modules. Do you always use separation of code and data, or do you have a big bloated Puppet code with tons of data inside? Do you use already a control repository which will create environments based on Git branches? When we say this is already all there, then it's easier to refactor instead to rewrite. When you have one huge monolithic Git repository, maybe with 24 Git submodules from upstream development, and you can't use pull out single components because everything is somehow tied together, then maybe it's a good time to say, this is not really best practice code base. Try to get rid of that code base. No, not try to get rid of that code base. Get rid of that code base and do it properly from scratch. When you are on Puppet 3.8, which you aren't, you can use the environment conf. You can then either upgrade your Puppet master, or you can just spin up a new Puppet master. Just be sure to copy the CA over, and the new master must be the CA server for everything. And then please start using canary nodes. Who's aware of what a canary node is? Okay, canary nodes come from the mining. So when people go under earth digging for coal, they always had, in the old ages, they had a little cage with a canary inside, a bird. So they went under earth, and when the bird was dead, they knew, okay, there's not enough oxygen, let's get out of here. And in IT we have something similar. It's not a bird, we call it just a canary node, because it's a node that we spin up, and in case that it's not working properly, we will destroy it again. nothing bad happens to our infrastructure. When you are in the process of upgrading things, please automate it. It makes no sense that you upgrade 120 servers manually. There's tools around, there's Puppet modules around that support you in upgrading from 3 to 4 also your Puppet agents. So please automate your automation. Well, by the way, how long have you, it's not for your fact, but when you have an existing Puppet platform, how old is this platform? Please think the Puppet CA is valid for 5 years after you have created it in the first place. Maybe it's time to do a CA rollover. Maybe you want to test that a little bit. So when we are either on Puppet 4 or even not yet have installed Puppet, why should we bother with upgrading? This brings us to next month, where Puppet 5 is about to release. And with Puppet 5, Puppet says no breaking changes. Codebase from Puppet 4 will continue to work with Puppet 4 will continue to work on Puppet 5. We will remove some deprecations, so hopefully you all check your log files for deprecations and error warnings. Okay, maybe some of you check your log files for errors and deprecation warnings. Okay, if you don't do it, please start looking at your log files, checking for error and deprecation warnings. It has Ruby 2.4 bundled. It has a new packaging system. It's almost the same, but they have some things they want to change. And they have some encrypted YAML data store integrated, so you don't have to store your production database passwords in plain text anymore. Which brings us to some more features in Puppet 5. Next word, M, metrics. Metrics are important to recognize where do I have issues on the platform, scaling issues, for example. And this is built into Puppet Enterprise Server and will become open source with Puppet 5 and the Puppet 5 server. It's either a Grafana board or there's an experimental internal built-in dashboard that you can make use of. The internal dashboard is not that configurable compared to the Grafana board. Which brings us to the next term, which will also be added in Puppet 5, which is automation. In Puppet Enterprise, they introduced 2 years ago an application orchestration interface, saying you have an application containing of a backend database, middleware servers, load balancer, front-end servers, load balancer. And you would want to deploy the system in this order via push concept from your Puppet master. There's code example from the Puppet Labs website. It's the so-called Puppet Application Orchestrator. This orchestrator will move to open source so that you can run on your Puppet master just a Puppet job run command, and you just specify which application is it that you want to roll out completely. The last of the 4 terms is sharing. And this CAMS, this is what Demon and John in the DevOps Days Mountain View back in 2010 said, this is the core principle of doing DevOps. So you need the culture for people to properly collaborate, for example. You want to automate everything, never do something manually. You need metrics. You need metrics for the IT department, and you need metrics for the product department, seeing how good is the product selling. Was it a good feature we enabled, or is it a bad feature? And you want to share. Share means share information across the company and beyond. So like we had it in some of the talks where people saying, go to conferences, talk about things you're doing, do blog postings. And this is what Puppet is doing. They communicate with their community, with the open source community, and they ask for feedback. So they have opened a thread on the Puppet 5 story. They have within their ticketing system, they have added a filter which allows you to easily check out all open tickets for Puppet 5 versions. And at the moment he's a little bit more silent. Henrik has a fantastic blog, Puppet on the Bleeding Edge, Puppet on the Edge, blogspot.de or .com or .lt. It's a Google blogger platform where he reports about the new stuff that will be coming in newer Puppet versions. So, happy upgrading to everybody. And I hope I haven't been too long, so we have a couple of minutes for questions.
We have some time for questions, so please feel free to ask.
Hello. I'm completely new to Puppet. I don't know much about it. But we have environment deployment to testing computers and for staging computers, and we use just a batch shell scripts to make this stuff deployment. How Puppet would help in this case? What it would easier for us because it works for us, and now it's interesting what could be a benefit.
Okay, we sometimes receive this question from different customers. So the first thing we are asking, does the tool work for you? Does the tool do what you expect it to do? Do you expect the tool to also cover all upcoming things that you have to do, and can you maintain it? So if you can say yes to all of these questions, then I have to ask you back, why do you want to change when you have everything in place and you're fantastic about it and you can maintain it and everything's running properly? When you at one of these things say, it's not so easy to maintain because it's 18,000 lines of shell code, not really done to best practices, how you do shell code nowadays, then we say, okay, now think about who's doing the automation. So what is it that you want to achieve? You mentioned two things in parallel. You meant staging of servers and you meant deployment. So what we usually suggest to customers is do something like Puppet for a security policy baseline rollout in all of your infrastructure. The benefit of it, Puppet is running after a pull principle. So the node who needs the configuration asks the server, please give me my configuration. And the node will only receive his own information and not information from other systems. When it comes to application deployment, Puppet is not really the great tool to have dynamic, flexible deployments, even maybe on parts of the platform only. Because the node can't differentiate between, is this some base configuration or is this some application stuff? He just says, I want my configuration, generally, and I will work on that. For these customers, for example, we recommend, hey, let the ops team do. We don't have ops and dev anymore, I know about that, but we still have, say, teams that manage infrastructures and that don't do application development. They will do Puppet for baselining, having some security baseline. So talk to their security department, talk to best practices on how to secure systems in the DMZ, and then you have the infrastructure, your developer, application developer, and you give them a tool, for example, like Ansible. The benefit of Ansible over Puppet is that you can easily do a push from a centralized system into your infrastructure. The only downside is for Ansible, you must have SSH. For Puppet, you don't have to have SSH.
Okay, thank you.
I was answering your question with a definite yes and no in one term. I know about that, yes.
Anyone else?
Who has never heard of Puppet? One person only. Okay, at least.
And I'm going... Oh.
Hello, just wanted to ask you if you create the infrastructure with Puppet, like you think it's better to create like bigger infrastructures with Puppet, or better to like think about it and
You mean what is the minimal number of nodes after which something like Puppet would make sense?
yeah,
One.
okay.
So because why is it that only one node only makes sense for having some kind of automation and having configuration management, even if it is one node only? What if that one node has hardware trouble and is gone? You want to restore it somewhere. And mostly people do backups and they never do restores. But nobody is interested in backups. Everybody is interested in restores. And usually you have it that restores will fail. And you have somehow changes where you say, what is it that you want to put into the backup? Do you really want to put the whole system into backup? Yeah, when it's a virtual machine, you can snapshot it. Okay. Then you can recreate it from a snapshot. But sometimes you say, no, I only want to store the data in the backup and the configuration, how the system is looking like. This is something I put into my configuration management. That reduces, on the other hand, the amount of storage needed on your backup system.